Здравствуйте. И спасибо. I appreciate being a guest in your language and in your country. And I'm very moved by the time I've spent in your country in the last 2.5 weeks, because I've spent it in the company of people who care very deeply about the future of this place and are really investing in it. And I was also given a wonderful gift. And now I know what she does in life too. She may remind you of someone you know. She's the guardian of values in your country. And her name is Mama. I think maybe Ubu Mama, meaning motherhood, not only mother. And she and I were having a conversation earlier today about Ukraine, all these wondrous things that are happening, about the future. And one thing she reminded me of is that there are people who have been there from the beginning, creating the context of values out of which we live. If you look at that slide behind me, that's the actual hands of an African mother, which she has then sewn as a place to hold her child. And all of you here are doing that too. So I'd like to begin by just asking you to remember the person, the people who first touched your hands, who first held you, and who over the course of your lives have held you in a way that's made you see your life and your country as a place of promise and hope. Because those are the people who are now holding the future too of what you do and what you become. And it's worth beginning by honoring them. Yesterday was also a special day for me. I was getting to listen to a very bright and engaging team in a very up-and-coming marketing PR firm. And it was a special day for me because 30 years ago yesterday, I gave birth for the first time to someone named Justin Browne, who has no sense of limits or fear, and who is an entrepreneur, I believe, at a cellular level, if that's possible. I think he took what I said to him and exponentially magnified it as a life in the world. And I, as his mother, was thinking yesterday about all those moments from the very, very beginning when you both are thrilled at the privilege of being a mother and terrified about whether or not your child will survive for lots of different reasons. As I thought about that, I also reflected back on a very important time 20 years ago when I was a mother of 3 young children. I was a banker and a priest working in both at the same time. But I was also, as a mother, looking at the life of our own big city of Chicago, a city both very imaginative and deeply divided. And the fact that young people in our city were at an unprecedented rate drinking themselves to death and murdering each other. And as I thought about that, I really wondered what would possibly explain that. Because at the point you have the most energy and vision in life, why would you want it all to end? And then it occurred to me that there was really only one reason that would be the case, is that you don't see that you have a viable future. And at the point you don't believe you have a viable future, life is cheap. Your own life and the life of everyone around you. You can't protect against that. So I began wondering what it would take to raise up a vision, a community, a practice in our city in which people learned again to think from the whole, and in which those people whose contributions had been excluded, the prisoners, the deaf-blind, all of those important contributors that we heard about today, at what point we could begin to reimagine the life of a city as a place in which everyone's contribution made a difference to the way forward. Because I was also thinking a lot about the power of imagination, I decided to throw a conference, and in this case, a conference to understand the images that had shaped what we saw as possible in our city. At that conference, someone asked a very big and provocative question, which was especially interesting to me as a priest. They said, "What do you believe is God's dream for our city?" And it was a question, the intent of which was to say, what truly is a dream that is worthy of your life and that we can only do together? And in that moment, I began wondering about a question which I wondered often about as a banker and a priest, which was the question, what is God's economy? And something occurred to me in that moment, which was that very simple and very familiar, you know what I mean, recycling symbol, as an image of the Trinity, with a banner headline in my own imagination that said, "In God's economy, nothing and no one is wasted." And the long story short was that 4 days later, I gave up the big banking job that paid the bills in our family in favor of an adventure because I was somehow pregnant with a vision that demanded my commitment. I went quite soon after that on an 8-day silent retreat because I knew somehow that this was my work, but I didn't know what the work was. You know, how do you find a way forward? And I can tell you that out of 8 days of silence, only one thing became very clear, which was a word echoing inside of me that said, "Think like a mother." Think like a mother. And as I began to think about that, since I had 3 young children, I thought, well, the first thing is that it's clear I can't design this child with a strategic plan. I have to simply trust life and make myself available to life. Because as I do that, the promise of this new thing, which life itself is bringing into being, will have my attention. But I did immediately put myself on the diet that I was on with each of my other children. I ate healthy food, I drank water, I got exercise, because what I knew about being pregnant is that a child inside of you demands all of your commitment. It is at the top of the food chain. It will starve the mother to death. So here I was with this big dream, and wondering then what happened next. Well, I sat down some couple of years ago now and began to think about that earliest word, think like a mother, and how it had unfolded. And I think what became clear to me was really 2 dimensions of this. One is one of my favorite definitions of motherhood. And you might note that the author of this book, Sarah Ruddick, doesn't confine motherhood to women, or even to women who give birth to children, but to anyone willing to do this work, which is to have a sustained, I would say faithful, response to the promise inherent in the creation of something new. That is the life project. That's really what we're talking about here, is what gives life, what regenerates the human enterprise, what regenerates us, what makes life better in a place. So the first thing is to say, what is the promise? What is the promise at the very heart of life that you're working to create? And the second dimension of this is to then say, what are those sustaining structures? Well, one sustaining structure that we're very familiar with as parents is the creation of home. And home is fundamentally a structure which holds an act of imagination, which says it is possible to hold things together against the odds, to make a space where difference becomes a strength, where everyone has a place at the table, and where dreams are sheltered and given a context in which to grow and take root in the world. That is an astonishing act of bravery, as anyone here who is either a parent or a child knows. And partly the courage it takes is necessary because it's emerging every day. My mother, and I have an extraordinary mother, said to me, the reason I wanted to be a full-time homemaker is because motherhood is the only career I know in which you have to learn something every day to be good at it. Because everything changes. The other thing I think any of us who have given birth, and again, I'm not limiting this to people in the room who have had a child, but to anyone who has had the courage to create something new, is that it is a very dangerous business. And I know because I work on a global level on maternal health and saving the lives of mothers dying in childbirth, all of these things come out of that project, which is called Ubu Mama, which I've decided is her African name. That what we've discovered is that the best predictor of whether a woman survives childbirth or whether her child survives is whether there's a skilled birth attendant. If you try to give birth alone, your chances are quite good that you'll die in childbirth. I've sometimes felt a little sad for men because women have an advantage over you, because when we're pregnant, it shows. When you're pregnant, it's not as visible. And when we're pregnant, people know they better show up and help. When you're pregnant, you have to say so. And the extent of the pregnancy is also not as obvious. So I think thinking about who the skilled birth attendants are in the Ukraine, for instance, who hold the possibility of this new future, who aren't scared of the fact that you never, ever get to give birth without it being painful, bloody, and messy. That is just the way it is. And it's that way because that's what life requires. That's the way life happens. So I love it when there are bankers and venture capitalists that say, wow, this takes a lot of courage, good for you. You know, startups look like this. But who also asks that long-term question. Because when you have a child, you don't declare victory and go home and say, I did it, I had a child, I'm pretty done. You say, oh my goodness, that child is my responsibility, now what do? I've never been here before. And the miracle of being a parent is that somehow by some grace, and I really mean that, we find this capacity to love this new growing thing which is utterly foreign to us, but somehow erupted out of our willingness to be vulnerable, to get naked. And in relationship to it, we have to become something more. We have to create, we have to learn, we have to do something which moves the life project forward. I love this. I don't know if you can read it. I may not be able to read it with these glasses, with these lack of glasses either, but Being pregnant is the most enjoyable moment if only you told yourself that you'll take care of the baby. Taking care starts when the baby is still inside. You eat healthy, you take care of yourself, and I promise you, you'll be for the baby when she's outside. Well, here's the dreamer. Here's the dreamer. You know something's coming, you don't quite know what, you know it's going to eat you alive. And then, again, it's so wise what people know. To raise a child as a single mother is not the easiest thing to do. Caring for him for 9 months, giving birth, even after that you don't sleep at night. You have to take care of the baby. Again, there you have it. And last but not least, and I'm going to flip to this last one, there's a huge difference between raising a child alone and with a husband. Being alone is not nice. But with the father, who's going to help here and there, you enjoy being a mother. Well, I don't know if that's the fathers clapping for the here and there or the mothers clapping for the fathers. But the point of this is really to say, if you think about these very simple dimensions, keep focused on the promise of life, because life always is threatened at every turn. The world is a difficult and dangerous and unpredictable place not under our control. So those people who can set a context, and what mothers know something about, is saying it's not any context, it's a constructive context, it's a creative context, it's a disciplined context. And above all, it's a context in which values are clear. My parents wrote me the best present I ever got, which was an essay I requested from each of them to tell me in writing without talking to each other what they had done as parents, because I have truly extraordinary parents. And one thing that my father said is, we ensured there was uniformity of values, but that in every other respect, we supported the differences of our children so that they could grow in the direction of the promise of their lives. So I would just leave you with that very simple thought. Who are the people standing next to you that make this promise of life possible, that give you courage? Who are the people who are standing there at the moment you're trying to give birth, who can just say to you, you know what, it's a mess, but you can take a breath? Ultimately, who are you as you trust life and to open yourself to that more? Because really the magnificence of the human project is that we can choose life. We can choose hope. We can choose to create. We can choose to be together in it. And that as we do that, life flourishes. Thank you.